Welcome back, gang. In this tutorial, I'll consider a common strategy for developing sentences, the appositive phrase. To illustrate the strategy, I'll examine several sentences written by the American astronomer Carl Sagan. You can find them in his book Cosmos, in which Sagan discusses scientific ideas for an educated popular audience. First, let's define the strategy. We say that two noun phrases are in apposition if one follows the other in a sentence and they refer to the same topic. The second noun phrase, the one we'll call the appositive phrase, typically clarifies the topic or provides additional information about it. Let's go straight to an example. Black holes were first thought of by the English astronomer John Michell in 1783. Let's isolate the two noun phrases. The first noun phrase is the English astronomer. The second is John Michell. The first noun phrase tells us a little about the topic. The person was English, and the person was an astronomer, but that's pretty general. Over the years, there have been thousands of English astronomers, so the appositive phrase limits the reference to exactly one English astronomer, the one named John Michell. Pay attention to the structure. There's just one noun phrase immediately followed by another noun phrase. They're not joined by a conjunction or a linking verb or any punctuation. We say that the noun phrases are in apposition because they're positioned side by side. In this case, the appositive phrase is restrictive. The name of the astronomer isn't extra, it tells us exactly which English astronomer the sentence refers to. This use of an appositive phrase follows a very common pattern. We describe someone in a general way, often by identifying their credentials or their background, and we follow that up with their name. Sagan uses the same pattern in this sentence. 17th century Holland was the home of the great Jewish philosopher Spinoza. Let's isolate the noun phrases and clean up the text to make it easier to see the parts. The first noun phrase introduces us to the great Jewish philosopher, and the appositive phrase identifies the person by name, Spinoza. Again, there's no punctuation between the first phrase and the appositive phrase, and the entire structure begins with the article the. If you're not familiar with this pattern, take a moment to memorize it. You'll use it a lot in the papers you write for university, especially in the social sciences and the humanities. Now let's turn to a closely related pattern. It's similar to the one we've been looking at, but also a little different. Here's my example. When I was a college undergraduate in the early 1950s, I was fortunate enough to work in the laboratory of H.J. Muller, a great geneticist. Do you see the apposition, the two noun phrases positioned side by side? This is the first, H.J. Muller, and this is the second, a great geneticist. The function of this structure is the same as the one that we looked at before, to introduce a person by name and provide information about their background. But there are two important differences. There's a comma between the noun phrases, and the phrase great geneticist is introduced with the article a instead of the. The sequence of ideas is different. It's the first noun phrase that names the person, and the appositive phrase that provides the additional information. As readers, we do not need to know that H.J. Muller was a geneticist in order to know who's being discussed. The name identifies the person thoroughly, so anything that follows the name is non-restrictive. We use the comma to set off non-restrictive information. And because there have been many great geneticists, the sentence must use a instead of the. Now, it turns out that I've played a little trick on you. Let me bring back the rest of the sentence. And here's the complete appositive phrase the way that Sagan originally wrote it. As you can see, it provides a lot more information. Again, this is a very common pattern that you should memorize. First the name, then the comma, and then the additional information. This pattern is especially useful when the additional information requires a lot of words. A general guideline when organizing multiple ideas is to move from simplicity to complexity. Either way, appositive phrases are very good at associating the names of people with their background information. An appositive phrase is also ideal when you need to define an important term without making a big fuss about it. Plant cells today have tiny molecular factories called chloroplasts, which are in charge of photosynthesis, the conversion of sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide into carbohydrates and oxygen. It's a more complicated sentence than the ones we've been looking at, but there's only one appositive structure. Have you spotted it? The first noun phrase is photosynthesis. Then we have a dash, and the appositive phrase is everything after the dash. If you're familiar with photosynthesis, you'll immediately recognize that the appositive phrase is an efficient definition of the topic. Sagan could have placed the definition in a separate sentence, but doing so would have drawn a lot more attention to the idea, and that might have been okay if the surrounding sentences were also about photosynthesis, but they're not. Notice the dash. Punctuation is required here because the definition follows the term, and that makes it non-restrictive. Sagan could have used a comma. The dash makes the appositive phrase easy to recognize. Your eye immediately senses the change, and if you're an experienced reader, you know that a definition is among the kind of things that are likely to follow a dash. This particular usage is common in academic writing. Let's look at another way that appositive phrases are commonly used, to provide clarification. Here's a simple example. In deep space, there is only about 1 atom in every 10 cubic centimeters, a volume the size of a grape. The first noun phrase is every 10 cubic centimeters, and the appositive phrase is a volume the size of a grape. I hope you'll agree this is a convenient way to help the reader visualize 10 cubic centimeters. Because the clarifying phrase is non-restrictive information, the first noun phrase and the appositive phrase are separated by a comma. In my experience, most appositive phrases are non-restrictive, so you should get accustomed to the idea that appositive phrases are usually set off with a comma or a dash. Let's finish now with one more way that appositive phrases are commonly used, to set off a list of examples. Some people, science fiction writers and artists, for instance, have speculated on what other beings might be like. In this sentence, the first noun phrase is some people. The appositive phrase is the short list between the dashes. Again, this is a very common pattern. The first noun phrase identifies a general class, and the appositive phrase identifies one or more specific members of the class. Notice that when the appositive phrase occurs in the middle of a sentence, we need punctuation to signal the beginning and the end of it, and the rules of English tell us that it must be the same punctuation. If we introduce the appositive phrase with a dash, we must close it with a dash. Sagan could have used a pair of commas here, but he chose to use dashes. The dash is an excellent choice when the appositive phrase itself contains one or more commas, as you see here. As before, this use of the dash is common in academic writing. In short, the appositive phrase is an efficient way to add information to a sentence. Now that you know how it works, I'm sure you'll find plenty of uses for it. Thanks for watching. Say what you mean.